You're listening to the Engaged Club podcast, where we believe that engagement of members, staff, and managers is the key to a thriving club.
Our aim is to help you become a better club manager by giving you practical, actionable club management and marketing advice.
I'm Roger Kincaid. I'm the marketing director at Off Course Golf. We make member and customer engagement tools for club managers that make growth and prosperity their business. You can find out more about what we do at offcourse.golf.
And I'm Jim Hope. I've been managing clubs and working in the hospitality business for nearly 40 years. I now proudly serve the members of the Derrick Golf and Winter Club in Edmonton, Alberta as their GM and COO.
Jim, in this podcast episode of the Engaged Club, I just want to talk about, the opportunity of changing the way you do things, but also the cost of being stuck in old ways. And it's just kind of like, I feel bad for throwing a friend under the bus here, Jim, but got this buddy of mine. He's a wonderful man. He plays golf with like a vintage set of golf clubs. I'm talking about like a Persimmon driver. Okay.
Nice.
Oh, it's beautiful. It is a wonderful museum piece. But every time this guy pumps a drive out there 130 yards, I think to myself, I just wonder what you're giving up by being stuck in these old ways.
So for those of you listening to this podcast, thanks very much for doing that. The Engaged Club podcast can be found on the engagedclub.com and is brought to you by the Canadian Society of Club Managers. Let's get into this, Roger.
So, look, it's really not a knock on my buddy who uses the persimmon woods, and he loves them. And, it's a great story piece, and he talks about them. He's got some benefit, and really, he's only hurting himself, right? He's going to hit that driver 130 yards, and then he's going to hit a 3-wood 2 more times on his way to a par 4. That's how he enjoys the game of golf. I got no business cracking on him. But when, being stuck in your old ways starts to impact, everything from the opportunity for the staff around you to move on up in the world, to your club being healthy enough to progress and to, meet market demands, then I think it's really incumbent upon the decision makers in a club to look at what's available to them, Jim, and try to make the best decision on any given day. Now, is that fair enough to say?
Oh, yeah, without question. And are you talking both from a marketing technology standpoint, sort of the whole gamut of the operation of a club?
I really am. And just to keep it simple for this conversation, maybe we'll just focus in on technology, and maybe we'll focus in on marketing technology, both because that's my forte and because, this is a lot of stuff, Jim, that you and I have talked about, particularly in recent episodes. And, I've got a couple of examples, and I want to be really clear at the outset of this conversation, Jim. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here. I'm not suggesting anybody gets fired. I'm not suggesting that you replace certain members of your staff. All I'm doing is having the conversation so that we can understand what, the cost of doing business, the cost of status quo is versus the opportunity that lies before us.
Okay.
We live in a time where we have got unprecedented ability to start a business, to create one's own wealth in a knowledge economy, right? And one of the ways that we see this manifest itself is in the amount of technology startup companies. Virtually anybody with programming skill who can identify a need in a market can go ahead and create an application, a computer program that's going to do something for us. So case in point, let's just talk about accounting software for a moment. Now, it used to be maybe even 10 years ago, and certainly 15 and 20 years ago, that your accountant was going to be somebody who's really skilled at, using Excel and making spreadsheets and pivot tables, managing all the accounting of the club, and, making sure that all the dollars and cents are accounted for, that the health of the club is, dashboarded, or that at least that you can have a 1-hour conversation with that person and figure out where the club stands today, how it's doing since yesterday, and where it's headed tomorrow, right?
Yep.
So somebody looked at that and said, well, I'll tell you what, I can take most of the skills that person has that the company couldn't live without and just put them in a box, create an application that you can then use, and that will make it possible, not just easier, not just, more efficient, but even possible for a company to launch without an accountant who's making, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. And so, what we see here, Jim, is we've got the old way of doing things, which is, we've got a member of the staff, We'd be completely lost without them. They've got all the answers. They've got the master spreadsheet. And when that person retires, then we've got this significant transition period where we've got to bring somebody into the club and get them up to speed. And there's going to be a lot of hiccups. That's the old way. The new way of doing it, and it's something that young companies, startup companies, they never really have to worry about, is they use apps like QuickBooks or FreshBooks or Wave or Cashew or Xero, right? And they use these accounting applications that keep track of their business. All the math is built in, so the processes are really simplified. And when the accountant that they have moves on, it's cool. The next person that comes in just has to know how to use the app that we use, and that's going to be hiring criteria, and we can move on seamlessly without much disruption. Or another opportunity that's available to a company like that is that they can outsource that accounting altogether, so that instead of having that paid staff position, they can get it done for something in the neighborhood of $15,000 to $20,000 a year. A third, a quarter, a fifth of what they might have been paying otherwise. So that's just, an example, Jim, about what the modern technology marketplace has allowed businesses to do that allows them to be more agile and more nimble.
Well, and it speaks to, Roger, that whole world of virtual these days, right? Whether you're a small business or a club and you have a virtual assistant, because you don't need somebody on staff full time, but you need some tasks to get done. You and I have talked about, is it Workup that we've used to do posters and all sorts of work that you can.
Upwork, yeah. Upwork or Fiverr, yeah, these kind of gig economy sites.
Yeah, so you don't need to have somebody full-time on staff doing this stuff. You can just contract it out on a project basis.
Yeah, that's a great example, Jim. And let's just slip into that one for just a second. If you've ever looking at, your administrative assistant and you say, we need a poster for this event that's coming up. Can you whip something up on Canva or, whatever graphic design program you might have on the computer, right? Let's say that it takes that executive assistant, 2 hours to get this task done, right? So he spends half the morning doing it. That's great. And, let's be really generous here and say that that's a minimum wage employee. And I'm being generous to the bottom line, right? Mm-hmm. So $30, it was $30 or whatever where we live, Jim, to get that poster done. You could have had it done for $5 on a website like Fiverr, and you'd have freed up that executive assistant for those 2 hours. So you'd actually be paying $5, but you'd get the $30 back. So it's a net 25, right? It's a net $25 win.
Yeah.
This is how I think the progressive club manager thinks about things. That spending money to get something done in less time without tying up my best resources, which is the people around me, is the way that we can get leaps and bounds ahead and really start to dominate the marketplace.
Well, and I think in today's economy and where golf is for a lot of clubs, if you can contract a service out or a project out without even having to have somebody full-time on staff, even at minimum wage, which is, as you say, being very, very generous, because they won't be, it just makes a ton of sense. And as you know, using those services, if you find somebody you like, you can just go to them directly without having to put it out to the whole service marketplace to get bids. You can just find a provider that you like, and they'll continue to provide for you.
Right. Exactly. You're talking about having a virtual graphic designer in the Philippines or in, Estonia who's doing this work for you on demand. So those websites, Jim, that we just kind of briefly discussed there, Upwork, Fiverr, those are hacks, to get things done quick and cheap, to buy back some of your time so you can focus on what's mandatory in-house. Let's kind of bring it back here, Jim, as we wrap this episode up, because, thinking about my friend who could benefit, who could probably pick up another 30 or 40 yards by switching to today's technology, a graphite shaft driver, the titanium head on the club, like, some of the best driver technology as compared to that persimmon driver. If you find yourself in your club saying, this is how we've always done things, that should be an inflection point for you. That should be a reason to change. That should not just be, maybe an opening to a conversation. If you ever say, we've always done it this way, it is probably something that you need to examine immediately, that you can change. We've always served the frozen hamburger patty. is not an excuse to not explore getting fresh, locally produced, ground chuck to make your hamburger out of. We've always cut the rough to 2 inches with this antiquated lawnmower is not a reason why you shouldn't explore upgrading the machinery in your turf care department. And, we have always just used a key on the door and turned the deadbolt at 11 o'clock at night is not a reason why you shouldn't explore getting those biometric scanners, or some sort of a security system on your buildings to make your club more efficient and more secure. So it really is just a question about auditing yourself and saying, what are some things that we haven't explored in a long time, we haven't really examined in a while? What are some processes that we have at this club that could probably benefit from being refreshed? And explore the opportunity to change fearlessly. Don't be afraid to change, because the cost of the status quo is often more than the discomfort of adopting a new process or a new system.
Well, and Roger, I would hope that the words "we've always done it this way" is not in the vocabulary of any general manager in any club. And if it's in the vocabulary of any of their team and someone says it, the first thing they say is why. That's the first question they ask. Why? Tell me why we do it that way. Why do we serve a frozen hamburger patty that tastes like sawdust? I just need you to explain to me why we do that. So I'm really glad you said that, because there's nothing that drives me nuts more as a club manager than some say, we've always done it that way. Okay, well, explain to me why, and if the rationale's good, well, we'll keep doing it that way. But you better have a pretty damn good explanation as to why we always do it that way.
Cool. I love it.
We really hope this episode is a big help to you. If you know somebody else that could benefit from this episode, please share it and let's grow together.
Yeah, the archive of this podcast is available at engagedclub.com, where you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our Slack space for more discussion. And of course, we'd always like to hear your thoughts, questions, ideas, comments, anything you have to say via email at hello@engagedclub.com. Thanks for listening.